The wind cut through Alara's threadbare cloak like a blade of ice. She shifted the heavy basket of wilted winter herbs against her hip, her boots crunching through the crust of snow that blanketed the forbidden stretch of forest between Blackwood Pack territory and the wilds beyond. This was no place for an Omega, especially not one alone as dusk bled into the dark under the pines. But the head beta's ailing daughter needed the bitterroot that only grew near the old standing stones, and Alara, with no family to defend her, was always the one sent into the shadows. Her breath plumed in the air, her senses, duller than any warrior's, straining against the silence. It was a silence that felt wrong. The usual scuttling of night creatures was absent. The air didn't just carry the scent of pine and frost. Beneath it was a metallic thread of blood, and something else. Something pure and sharp like lightning on a summer day. A low whimper shattered the stillness. Alara froze, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. It was a pup's cry. Thin and desperate. Instinct screamed at her to run. A lone pup here meant predators. Or worse. A trap. But the sound came again. A broken thing that tugged at a place deep in her chest. A place untouched by the years of quiet scorn she endured. She followed the sound, moving off the path into a thicket of thorny brambles. The scent of blood grew stronger, mingled now with that clean, electric aroma. Pushing aside a frost-laden branch, she saw them. 2 wolf pups, barely a moon old, huddled together in a shallow depression between the roots of an ancient oak. They were like ghosts made flesh, their fur the color of freshly fallen snow, so white it seemed to glow against the dark earth. But it was a glow marred by danger. Crimson streaked the side of the larger one, a shallow gash along its ribs. The smaller one was shivering violently, its blue eyes wide with terror. Around them, the snow was churned and stained, telling a story of a frantic chase, a desperate last stand. They were not just any pups. Their size, the intelligent gleam in their eyes despite the fear, the potent, unnerving power that radiated from them in faint, shimmering waves. They were alpha-born, purebloods, and they were alone. "Oh, little ones," Alara whispered, her voice hushed with awe and fear. She dropped her basket, kneeling in the snow without thought for the cold. The larger pup bared tiny milk teeth, a raspy growl in its throat, trying to stand protectively before its sibling. It was a valiant, heartbreaking effort. Alara moved slowly, offering the back of her hand. She let her own subdued Omega scent, usually a source of dismissal, flow freely, non-threatening, gentle, a scent of hearth and harmless things. "Shh, I won't hurt you. You're so lost." The pup sniffed, its growl stuttering. Exhaustion and pain won over instinct. It collapsed with a soft whine. Acting on a maternal impulse she never knew she possessed, Alara tore a strip from her woolen underskirt. With hands numb from cold but steady with purpose, she cleaned the wound as best she could, whispering nonsense comforts. The smaller pup nuzzled its way under her hand, seeking warmth. They couldn't stay here. The blood would draw scavengers, and the unnatural silence meant whatever had hunted them might still be near. But taking them back to the Blackwood Pack village, Omegas did not return with stolen alpha pups. The suspicion, the accusations of kidnapping or treachery, would be immediate, her word against the world. Yet looking into those blue eyes, feeling the tremble of their small bodies, Alara knew she had no choice. She emptied her herb basket, lining it with her cloak, and gently lifted the pups inside. They curled together, a heap of white fur, their strange energy humming against her skin. The larger one licked her thumb once, a gesture of profound trust that made her throat tight. The journey back was a blur of fear. Every shadow seemed to move, every crack of a branch was a pursuing enemy. She avoided the main gate, slipping through a break in the palisade she used to forage, her pulse roaring in her ears. Her small hut, on the furthest edge of the Omega quarters, was dark and cold. But it was shelter. She built a fire, warmed some goat's milk, and fed them drop by drop, her fingers stroking the unbelievably soft fur between their ears. As they slept, huddled on her cot, she studied them. In the firelight, she saw it clearly, tiny silvery markings like intricate Celtic knots swirled across their pelts, visible only when the light hit them just right. They pulsed faintly, in time with their heartbeats. Magic. Old magic. A heavy fist pounded on her door, making her jump. "Alara! The Alpha has returned early from the border patrol. He is enraged. The whole pack is summoned to the square now." It was Caden, a low-ranked sentry, his voice tense. They say his children are missing. Ice flooded Ilara's veins. His children. Of course. Only the direct offspring of an alpha could possess such power, such presence. Kale, alpha of Blackwood, was a widower. His Luna had died years ago, not in childbirth, but from a wasting fever that had taken her slowly, long after their twins were born. The pack whispered he had become a hardened fortress of a man since, ruling with fierce justice but no warmth, his love buried with her. And now she, an Omega with no status, had his missing heirs hidden in her hut. The pup with the injured ribs chose that moment to stir, opening its eyes. They were no longer just blue. Swirls of storm gray and silver moved in their depths, like clouds over a moonlit sea. It looked at her, and a single, clear thought that was not her own blossomed in her mind. A feeling of safe, warm protect. The pounding came again, more insistent. Ilara, now! He's tearing the territory apart. Anyone found harboring knowledge will be exiled or worse. She looked from the door to the miraculous, sleeping creatures on her bed. The Alpha was a storm of wrath, gathering in the heart of the pack. She had saved his most precious treasures, but to walk into that square, to confess she had them, it could be seen as an act of salvation, or the ultimate crime. The truth, she realized with a sinking heart, would depend not on her actions, but on the mercy of a grieving Alpha who trusted no one. She covered the pups with a blanket, her hand lingering on their soft warmth. Then she turned, opened the door, and stepped out into the freezing night, walking toward the roaring fury of the Alpha's grief, the fate of the white wolves resting silently in the dark behind her. The pack square was a sea of tense bodies and frightened eyes, all turned toward the raised wooden platform where Alpha Kale stood. Torches hissed and spat, casting long, dancing shadows that made the gathered wolves seem like a restless, many-headed beast. Ilara slipped into the back of the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she feared others would hear it. Kyle was a silhouette carved from the night itself. He stood well over 6.5 feet, his broad shoulders strained against the dark leather of his armor. He wasn't pacing or roaring, his stillness was more terrifying. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane, a profound quiet that promised annihilation. The air around him vibrated with his suppressed power, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. His scent, even from this distance, was a blizzard pine and frost and raw, untamed dominance. They were last seen near the Western Nurse. His voice cut through the murmurs, low and graveled with a pain that was not just parental, but territorial. A breach had occurred. His den, his very blood, had been threatened. No trace, no scent trail after the river stones. This was not the work of mere scavengers. His beta, a grizzled warrior named Torvin, stepped forward. "We have scoured the borders, Alpha. No foreign scent lingers. It is as if they vanished." Kale's head lifted, his eyes scanning the crowd. They were a startling, pale gray, like winter ice, and they held no warmth. "Then they are within our territory. And someone," he said, the word dropping like a stone, "knows something." The silence that followed was absolute. Ilara felt the weight of his gaze sweep over her, a physical touch that made her knees tremble. She was an Omega. She was meant to be invisible, but the secret in her hut burned like a brand. An older warrior from the eastern flank spoke up, voice hesitant. "Alpha, the Standing Stones. There are old tales of portals, of things being taken." "I do not hunt my children with nursery stories," Kale interrupted, his voice a whip crack. The warrior flinched. "I hunt with fact. They are here. My blood calls to me, but it is faint, muffled." He clenched his fists, the leather of his gauntlets creaking. "I will tear every dwelling apart, stone by stone, until I find them. If any hand has harmed them, I will not grant the mercy of a swift death." A collective shiver ran through the pack. This was not an empty threat. This was the promise of a soul pushed to the brink. Ilara's mouth was dry as ash. The image of the pups, his children sleeping trustingly on her bed, flashed before her eyes. If his warriors, in their frantic search, stormed her hut, they might see a threat and strike first. The pups might try to defend her. The thought of any harm coming to them because of her hesitation was unbearable. She acted before thought could solidify into fear. "Alpha." The word was a mere breath, but in the suffocating quiet, it carried. 100 heads turned. Whispers rustled through the crowd like dry leaves. The Omega. The forager. What does she want? Kale's icy gaze locked onto her. He didn't recognize her. She was sure of it. She was part of the landscape of his pack, unseen. Speak, he commanded, the single syllable granting her a terrifying audience. Elara stepped forward, the crowd parting for her as if she were contagious. She kept her eyes lowered, the submissive posture instinctual, but her voice did not waver. I may have information. Look at me when you address your alpha. She forced her head up, meeting his storm-gray eyes. The intensity there was a physical blow, a force that sought to lay her soul bare. She saw the grief beneath the rage, a deep, yawning chasm that echoed her own loneliness. It gave her a sliver of courage. I was gathering herbs by the standing stones at dusk, she began, her words clear in the frozen air. I found signs of a struggle. And blood. Kael was before her in 3 swift strides, a wave of his power preceding him. Warriors moved to flank him, but he halted them with a minute gesture. He loomed over her, his scent enveloping her, not just storm and pine, but now, underneath, the sharp, desperate tang of a father's fear. What kind of blood? Wolf blood, fresh, and a scent, like ozone, like a clean strike of lightning. She dared not mention the pups directly. Not yet. She had to lead him there, to show him, not just tell him. Telling could be seen as a confession. Showing might be seen as salvation. His eyes narrowed, the ice in them fracturing with a flicker of something else recognition. That is their scent. You are certain? I am certain, Alpha. Why did you not report this immediately? The question was lethal in its softness. I was afraid. It was the truth, and it was a language he might understand. The silence in the woods was unnatural. I feared what might still be there. I returned directly to my home to think. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his gaze piercing. He was listening, she realized, not just to her words, but to the rhythm of her heart, the flow of her scent. He was searching for deceit. Show me, he said finally, the command, leaving no room for refusal. Take me to the exact place. Now. He turned to Torvin. No one moves. No one leaves this square until I return. He gestured for her to lead, falling into step beside her. His presence was a wall of heat and tension at her side as they left the torches and the staring eyes behind, entering the dark tunnel of the path toward the Omega quarters. The silence between them was thick, charged. Your name, he said, not looking at her. Elara. Elara. He tested the sound of it. You are the one who tends the sick. The one who finds the rare herbs. She was shocked he knew that much. Yes, Alpha. You are far from the stones now, he observed, his voice dangerously neutral as they passed the last of the warrior lodges and approached the smaller, simpler huts. The scent, she said, her throat tight. The clearest trace. It did not end in the woods. She stopped before her door. Her hands were shaking. She fumbled with the latch, took a deep breath that did nothing to steady her, and pushed it open. The fire had burned low, painting the single room in warm, dancing hues. On her narrow cot, the blanket had been pushed aside. The 2 white pups were awake. The larger one was sitting up, ears pricked, while the smaller one gnawed contentedly on the edge of Elara's woolen shawl. The moment Kael crossed the threshold, the world stopped. A sound tore from him, a raw, shattered thing that was half gasp, half sob. The immense power that had been coiled around him like a shield shattered, falling away to reveal the utterly devastated man beneath. He dropped to his knees, armor scraping against the earth floor. The pups turned. The larger one, the male, let out a happy yip and scrambled off the bed, tumbling into a clumsy run toward him. The smaller female followed, her tail wagging in a blur of white. Kael gathered them into his arms, burying his face in their fur. His broad shoulders shook. He was whispering their names. Lycos. Luna. Over and over, a broken litany of relief. The pups licked his face, their tiny whimpers now ones of joy, wriggling in his grasp as they bathed him in their affection. Elara stood by the door, forgotten, her own eyes stinging with tears. She witnessed the fortress crumble, saw the raw, unguarded love flood in. It was the most intimate and devastating thing she had ever seen. After a long moment, Kael drew a ragged breath. He pulled back, his hands running over them, checking the injury she had cleaned on Lycos. His touch was infinitely gentle. He studied the neat bandage, then raised his eyes to Alara. The storm in them had changed. The ice had melted, replaced by a turbulent sea of emotions she couldn't name. He looked from the clean wound, to the bowl of warm milk by the hearth, to the way the pups turned their heads to look at her even as they nestled against him. "You," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You brought them here. You hid them. You cared for them." It was not an accusation. It was a realization, dawning with the force of a sunrise. "They were hurt and alone," she said simply. "I could not leave them." Kael rose to his feet, a pup cradled in each massive arm. He looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing the woman, not just the Omega. He saw the herb-stained fingers, the worn but clean clothes, the quiet strength in her bearing, the kindness in her eyes that had saved his world. "You sheltered the Alpha's heirs," he said, stepping closer. The pups in his arms made soft sounds, reaching their little muzzles toward her. "You risked my wrath to give them warmth and milk. You bound my son's wound." He was so close now. His scent was different, the blizzard had calmed, leaving the clean pine and a new, warmer note, something like deep earth after a thaw, and beneath it, something else stirred, a primal, resonant hum that made the air between them vibrate. His gaze dropped to her throat, to the bare, vulnerable column where an Omega would bear a mating mark. Then his eyes snapped back to hers, widening with a shock that mirrored the sudden, dizzying jolt that passed through Alara's own body. It was a pull, a cosmic click, a string of fate plucked so hard it echoed in her bones. The pup in his left arm, little Luna, made a curious chirping sound. A faint, silvery light, the same as the markings on their fur, glowed for a second in her tiny palm, and she reached out, patting Alara's arm. In that silent, breathless space, filled only with the crackle of the fire and the soft panting of the pups, Alpha Kael found not only his lost children, but a truth that upended his broken world. The woman before him was not just their savior, and as the realization struck him, a different kind of storm began to gather in his eyes, one of wonder, possession, and a terrifying, exhilarating hope. The secret was out, but a far greater, more dangerous mystery had just begun. The pull between them was no longer just gratitude. It was destiny, and it demanded an answer. The silence in the hut was no longer quiet. It thrummed with the aftermath of the revelation, a tangible energy that made the very air seem to crackle. Kael did not move, his children held securely against his chest, his winter-gray eyes holding Alara's with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. The primal hum between them stretched, a taut wire of recognition that vibrated with every heartbeat. It was little Lycos who broke the spell. He squirmed in his father's arm, letting out an impatient yip, his nose twitching toward the cold hearth and the empty bowl. The ordinary need was an anchor, dragging them back from the precipice of the unimaginable. Kael blinked, the alpha mask sliding back into place, but it was fractured now, lines of awe and confusion visible in the set of his jaw. He cleared his throat, the sound rough. "They're hungry. The goat's milk is warm by the fire," Alara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She moved automatically, fetching the small pot and a clean rag. Her hands trembled only slightly. "Show me," Kael commanded, but the edge was gone from his tone. It was a request wrapped in authority. She knelt by the hearth, dipping the rag and letting the milk soak in. Kael knelt beside her, the size of him making her small hut feel even smaller. He watched, his gaze sharp, as she offered the cloth to Lycos, who latched on and began to suckle with fierce concentration. She then prepared another for Luna, who was more delicate, lapping at the moisture with a tiny pink tongue. Kael did not take over, he observed, his presence a steady, overwhelming heat at her side. He watched her hands, gentle and capable, watched the way the pups relaxed into her care, their strange silvery markings glowing faintly with contentment. "They trust you," he stated, a note of wonder in his voice. "They have never trusted a stranger, not since their mother." Alara dared a glance at him. The torchlight from the square outside caught the planes of his face, highlighting the scars, the fatigue, and the lingering softness around his eyes as he watched his children feed. "They were scared. I just tried to be calm." "You were more than calm." His eyes met hers again, searching. "You saw their markings. You felt their power." She nodded, unable to lie. They shine. Like moonlight on water. A long, assessing silence followed, broken only by the pup's contented sounds. Finally, Kale spoke, his decision made. You cannot stay here. A cold knot formed in Alara's stomach. Was this to be her punishment? Exile for touching what was his? This hut is not secure. It is not suitable. He stood, lifting the pups as he rose. You will come to the Alpha's lodge. You will stay in the guest quarters adjoining my den. The children are comfortable with you. They will need that comfort as they recover from this ordeal. It was not a request. It was a decree. But it was not born of cruelty. It was strategy. And something more personal. Something he was not yet ready to name. Alpha, my place is here, she managed, though the protest was weak. The thought of being in the heart of the pack, under the scrutiny of betas and warriors, was terrifying. Your place, he said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant register that seemed to bypass her mind and speak directly to her wolf. A part of her she'd always considered dormant, is where the Alpha says it is. And right now, it is with them. He shifted Luna in his arm. The pup making a soft sound of protest at being moved. Gather what you need. Only essentials. Be quick. There was no refusing him. Alara moved on, numb legs, stuffing a few spare clothes, her precious herb kit, and the wooden carving of a howling wolf her father had left her into a small sack. Her mind raced. Was this protection or possession? Gratitude or something far more complicated? He waited by the door, a statue of impatience and power. When she was ready, he stepped out into the night. The pack was still assembled in the square. A silent, watchful audience. Every eye widened as they emerged, their fierce Alpha, holding his miraculously found children, and the Omega forager trailing behind him with a bag. The children are found, Kale announced, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority, booming across the silent crowd. They are safe. They were protected by one of our own. He did not look at Alara, but his words hung in the air. A shield and a proclamation all at once. The threat is still unknown. Increased patrols. Double the guard on the nursery den. No one travels alone. Dismissed. The pack scattered. Whispers exploding like startled birds. Alara felt the weight of their stares. Curiosity, suspicion, envy. She kept her eyes on the ground, following Kale's broad back as he strode through the center of the village toward the large, timber and stone lodge that crowned the small hill at its heart. The Alpha's lodge was a world apart. The main room was dominated by a massive stone fireplace where a fire roared. Trophies and weapons adorned the walls, but also woven tapestries, now dusty with neglect. It spoke of both strength and a life interrupted by grief. It was clean but cold, lacking a woman's touch, lacking warmth. He led her down a hallway to a smaller chamber. It was simple but well built, with a proper bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the forest. A door, currently closed, presumably connected to his own sleeping den. This is yours, he said, placing the now sleeping pups carefully on the thick fur rug before the hearth in the main room. He turned to her. You will see to their needs, their meals, their comfort. You will report anything unusual, any glow, any strange behavior, directly to me, no one else. Alara nodded, clutching her sack. Yes, Alpha. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. You are under my protection now, Alara. That means something in this pack. Do not wander alone. If anyone questions you, you send them to me. The statement was absolute. Before she could respond, a faint, silvery light pulsed from the rug. Luna, in her sleep, had stretched out a paw. The intricate markings on her tiny leg shimmered, and a handful of dormant ash in the fireplace lifted, swirling in a miniature, silent vortex before settling again. Kale's breath caught. He looked from his daughter to Alara, his expression grim. You see? Their power is awakening early. It is unstable. It was why they were targeted. He fixed her with a stare. Your calmness. It soothes them. It dampens the energy. I felt it in the hut. He took a step closer, invading her space once more. His scent, the thawing earth and pine, wrapped around her. What are you? He murmured. More to himself than to her. Alara's heart hammered. I am just an Omega, Alpha. A ghost of something, not a smile, but the faintest relaxation of a line near his eye touched his face. No, he said, his voice a low rumble. You are the woman who walked into a storm of my rage, carrying my heart in her hands. You are anything but. Just anything. He turned and walked to the door connecting their rooms. With his hand on the latch, he paused, not looking back. Sleep. The children will wake at dawn. They like to be near the window when the sun rises. Then he was gone, closing the door with a soft but definitive click. Alara stood alone in the lavish, foreign room. The weight of the day crashed down upon her, the fear in the woods, the terror in the square, the shocking pull of his presence. The impossible reality of the pups and their magic. She sank onto the bed, her fingers tracing the rough wool of her blanket. Through the wall, she could hear the deep, muffled sounds of him moving in his den. Then, a softer sound, the rustle of fur, a deep, contented sigh, as he presumably settled with his children. The sounds were intimate, domestic. They painted a picture that both thrilled and terrified her. She was in the den of the Alpha. She had saved his heirs, and a connection had been sparked between them that threatened to ignite everything in its path. Outside, the Blackwood slept, but inside the lodge, two hearts beat in the dark, separated by a wall of timber and a world of unspoken fate, while between them slept the white, glowing key to it all. The calm was an illusion. The real storm was just beginning to gather. Dawn broke not with sunlight, but with a tiny cold nose pressed against Alara's cheek. She opened her eyes to find Luna standing on her pillow, blue-gray eyes wide and curious. The pup let out a soft woof, her silver markings faintly luminous in the pre-dawn gloom filtering through the window. Good morning, little one, Alara whispered, her heart swelling with an affection that felt as natural as breathing. She heard a thump from the main room, Lycos, likely exploring. Quickly, she dressed and opened her door. The main lodge was quiet. The fire had burned down to embers. Lycos was indeed batting a loose thread on a fur rug around. He saw her and bounded over, tail wagging, his earlier injury seemingly forgotten, though the faint scar would remain. He was stronger, more confident than his sister. The connecting door was still closed. Alara set about rebuilding the fire, then prepared their milk. As she worked, she felt a presence. She turned. Kyle stood in the doorway of his den, leaning against the frame. He wore simple linen pants and nothing else. The scars of 100 battles mapped his torso, a testament to a life of violence, but his posture was relaxed, his eyes still soft with sleep. He watched her, his gaze tracking her movements as she fed the pups. They woke you, he stated. It's all right, she said, not looking up, intensely aware of his bare chest and the domesticity of the scene. They're no trouble. They are endless trouble, he corrected, but there was no heat in it. He walked over, the floorboards creaking under his weight, and sat in a large carved chair near the hearth. He ran a hand through his sleep-tousled dark hair. Luna's light. Did you see it last night? The ashes in the fireplace? Yes. It's growing. Last week, she made the frost patterns on the window bloom like flowers. He sighed. A sound of deep weariness. Their mother. She had a touch of the old magic. It seems they have more than a touch. Alara finished wiping Lycos's muzzle. What does it mean? It means they are precious beyond measure. And targets. His gray eyes pinned her. The attack was not random. Someone knew what they were. Knew their power was coming awake. And tried to take them from the neutral ground near the standing stones. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're calm, Alara. When you are near, the random pulses stop. The glow fades to almost nothing. Why? She shook her head helplessly. I don't know. I feel quiet inside when I'm with them. I want them to feel safe. Quiet, he repeated, as if testing the word. My world has not been quiet since the day they were born. Even before, since their mother died. He spoke of it plainly, the pain an old scar, but one that still ached in certain weather. The pack is loud. My thoughts are loud. But here, this morning, with them fed and you moving by the fire. He didn't finish the thought. But the implication hung in the air. It is quiet. A comfortable silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the pups' playful growls as they tussled. Alara dared to look at him. In the gentle morning light, he looked younger. The harsh lines of grief and responsibility softened. He was watching his children, a small, undeniable smile touching his lips. Then, Lycos yelped. Not in play, but in surprise. A ball of static energy, visible as a shimmer of light, sparked between his paws where he'd been scrabbling at the rug. It popped with a tiny crack, making Luna jump. In an instant, Kale was off his chair, kneeling between them, his large hands hovering. Easy, son. Control it. Breathe. But Lycos was startled, and fear fueled the power. Another spark, larger, leapt from his fur toward a bronze goblet on the low table. The metal began to vibrate, emitting a low, dangerous hum. Lycos! Kale's command was alpha power, meant to compel obedience, but it only spooked the pup more. The goblet rattled violently. Without thinking, Alara moved. She didn't command or shout. She simply walked over, knelt beside Kale, and placed her hand on Lycos's back. She let out a slow, steady breath, pouring every ounce of peaceful, omega stillness she possessed into her touch. She hummed a lullaby, an old, forgotten tune. The effect was immediate. Lycos's panicked panting slowed. The sparks died. The goblet settled with a final clink. The pup turned and buried his face against her thigh, whining softly. Alara looked up. Kael was staring at her, his face inches from hers. His expression was one of sheer, unvarnished shock. The full force of his attention was a physical thing. How did you do that? He breathed. I didn't do anything. I just was with him. You calmed his magic. He looked at her hand, still resting on the white fur. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and covered her hand with his own. The contact was electric. It was not like the pull of fate from the night before. This was more specific, more profound. A surge of energy, warm and golden, flowed from his touch up her arm, and she felt an answering warmth from her own core. The air around their joined hands seemed to shimmer, not with silver light, but with a gentle, amber glow. Both of them froze. The pups fell completely silent, watching. Kale's eyes widened as he felt it too, the synergy, the resonance. His thumb moved, a bare whisper of a stroke across her knuckles. By the moon, he whispered, his voice thick with awe. It's not just them. It's you. You're a conduit, a stabilizer. He didn't let go. His gaze searched her face, dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. The morning quiet was gone, replaced by a new, potent tension. The Alpha and the Omega, kneeling together, their hands linked over the mystical child that connected them. A sharp knock at the lodge's main door shattered the moment. Kale dropped her hand as if burned, the Alpha mask slamming back down. He stood in one fluid motion. Enter. Beta Torvin walked in, his eyes taking in the scene, the Alpha shirtless, the Omega on the floor with the pups. The intimate closeness. His expression remained neutral, but his scent betrayed a flicker of surprise. Alpha. A scout has returned from the Silverwood border. He brings a message. What message? Torvin's gaze flickered to Alara. It is for your ears only, Alpha. Kale's jaw tightened. He gave a short, sharp nod. Alara, take the children to your room. Stay there. The dismissal was cold, a return to formality that stung after the shared wonder of the moment before. Alara gathered the pups, holding them close, and retreated to her chamber. As she closed the door, she heard the low rumble of Kale's voice and Torvin's responding murmur. Words drifted through the thick wood. Silverwood Alpha. Interested in the phenomenon. Requests an audience. Knows about the white wolves. Alara sank onto her bed, Lycos and Luna curling into her lap. She stroked their fur, the silvery markings cool under her fingertips. She had soothed their wild power. Her touch had combined with Kale's to create something new, something warm and gentle. But outside her door, the world was intruding. Other alphas were hearing whispers. The pup's secret was leaking, and with it, her own strange role was being exposed. The quiet within the lodge had been a beautiful, fragile bubble. Now, the first fingers of a greater storm were reaching for them, and the message from Silverwood felt less like a request, and more like a threat. The safe haven was cracking. The closed door felt like a barrier between two worlds. In the quiet of her room, Alara could still feel the ghost of Kale's hand over hers. The warm, amber resonance of their combined touch. Lycos and Luna snoozed in her lap, their strange energy quiescent, mere sleeping pups once more. But outside, the low, Urgent voices painted a different picture, one of borders, politics, and threat. She couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clear. Tension, suspicion, a simmering anger from Kale that was carefully controlled for the benefit of his beta. After what felt like an hour, a heavy knock sounded on her door. It swung open before she could answer. Kyle stood there, now dressed in his dark leathers, his face a mask of grim authority. The softness of the morning was gone, burned away by the new information. "Come," he said. "We attend a meeting of the Elder Council. You will bring the children." "The Council? Alpha, I am not. You are the keeper of my heirs and a witness to the event that threatens our pack," he stated, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Your account of the woods, of their state when you found them, is necessary, and your presence." He paused, his icy gaze holding hers. "Your presence calms them. I will not have their power sparking fear in a room of old warriors." It was a practical reason, but Ilara sensed it was not the only one. He was pulling her into the heart of pack business, a place no Omega ever tread. It was a dangerous promotion. The council chamber was a somber, wood-paneled room in the lodge, dominated by a large oak table scarred by time and use. 5 elders and Beta Torvin were already seated. Their eyes, sharp and assessing, tracked Ilara as she entered, the white pups cradled in her arms. A ripple of awe and unease went through them at the sight of the legendary white wolves, so small and vulnerable. Kale took his seat at the head of the table, gesturing for Ilara to stand at his right side, a place of significance that did not go unnoticed. Torvin's eyebrows climbed. "Report," Kale commanded. Torvin cleared his throat. "The scout intercepted a Silverwood patrol. Their alpha, Vorlon, sends a message. He has heard rumors of a celestial blessing upon Blackwood wolf pups of pure moonlight. He expresses enthusiastic congratulations and a desire to see this wonder for himself. He proposes a visit in 1 moon's time to share in the joy and discuss an alignment of our pack's fortunes." The words were diplomatically sweet, but their meaning was sour. "He knows," one of the elders, a woman named Igraine, spat. "He knows of their power. Discuss an alignment means he wants a claim. A marriage pact when they come of age, or worse, a demand for fostering. He must have had spies near the stones," another elder growled. "The attack was a botched theft. Now he tries the diplomatic route." Kale's hand rested on the table, fingers tapping once, slowly. "Silverwood is larger. Their minds make them rich. But their strength is brittle. All show and polished steel." He looked at the pups, then at Ilara. "Describe the attacker's scent again." "Precisely." All eyes turned to her. Ilara's throat tightened, but she forced her voice to be clear. "I am no warrior, elders. I know herb lore. Not battle sense. But beneath the blood, and the pup's own lightning smell, there was a hint of stone. Cold, wet stone. And metal. Not warm iron, but something sharper, like silver ore." A heavy silence fell. "Silverwood's territory is riddled with old silver mines," Torvin said quietly. "The stone there has a particular scent." "It was no rogue predator," Kale concluded, his voice like grinding stones. "It was a sentient attack, likely by a warrior commanded to bring them back alive and unseen." When it failed, Vorlon shifted tactics. He turned his glacial gaze to the council. "We refuse the visit. That is an insult he may take as cause for challenge," Igraine warned. "Let him challenge. My heirs are not bargaining chips. They are mine." The possessive ferocity in his voice made the air hum. He finally looked up at Ilara, standing beside him. "And they have a protector now, one who can temper their power, keep it hidden from prying senses." The elders stared at Ilara with new intensity, seeing not just an Omega, but a tool, a mysterious asset. "How is this possible?" an elder named Brahm asked, skepticism in his tone. "An Omega quieting Alpha-born magic? It is unnatural." Before KL could retort, a spark of silver light flickered over Luna's fur, a reaction to the tension in the room. Ilara instinctively tightened her hold, humming the same low, steady note from that morning. She focused on peace, on stillness, on the image of a deep, quiet forest pool. The silver glow faded, absorbed back into the pup's fur until it was just white again. The demonstration was more effective than any argument. The elders leaned back, murmuring. "It seems," Kale said, a trace of satisfaction in his voice, The moon goddess provides unexpected solutions. Elara stays with them. She is their guardian, as sanctioned by me. This is not up for debate. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. Send our reply to Silverwood. We thank Alpha Vorlon for his congratulations. The pups are healthy but delicate after their ordeal. We are in a period of mourning and recovery, and cannot entertain guests. We will send word when the time is more favorable. It was a delay, not a refusal. A strategic play for time. As the elders filed out, Torvin lingered. Alpha, with respect. Keeping her so close, elevating her so publicly. It causes talk. Some say you mean to make her more than a guardian. Kael didn't look at Elara, but she felt the weight of the unspoken question hang between them all. Let them talk, he said. His voice dangerously soft. Her value to the pack, and to me, is now beyond their gossip. She is under my protection, Torvin. See that the pack understands what that means. When they were alone in the chamber, the fire crackling in the grate, Kael finally turned to her. The council room hardness was still there, but beneath it, she saw the man from the morning, the one who had shared a moment of wonder. You did well, he said. You stood before the elders and did not flinch. I was terrified, she admitted quietly. But you did not show it. That is strength. He stepped closer, looking down at the now sleeping Luna. The scent of stone and silver. You may have just given us the proof we needed. Thank you. His gratitude was sincere, and it warmed her more than the fire. What happens now? She asked. Now, he said, his gaze lifting from the pup to her face. We prepare. Vorlon will not take this slight lightly. He will push in other ways. And he reached out, not touching her, but his hand hovered near her arm where she held the pups. We must understand this connection. This calming power you have, for their safety, and for yours. The way he said, for yours, held a new depth of concern. She was no longer just a useful Omega. She was becoming entangled in the very center of his world. A target by association. I don't understand it either, she whispered. Then we will learn together, he said, and it felt like a promise, or perhaps a vow. The path ahead was dark with the shadow of Silverwood, but for the first time, Elara did not feel she was walking it alone. She stood beside her Alpha, his children in her arms, and the unknown future stretching before them, pulsing with danger and a strange, destined light. The days settled into a new, fragile rhythm. Elara's life was now circumscribed by the Alpha's lodge, the two white pups, and Kael's intense, often silent presence. She was a guardian, a nursemaid, and an object of intense pack curiosity. Whispers followed her when she walked to the herbalist for supplies, escorted always by a stern-faced warrior. Some were jealous, some suspicious, some awed by the proximity to power. Through it all, the bond between her and the pups deepened. Lycos, bold and playful, saw her as a favorite climbing post. Luna, quieter and more observant, would often sit and watch her with those ancient, knowing eyes, her tiny paw resting on Elara's hand as if to share a secret, and their power did, indeed, stabilize in her presence. The random, sparkling discharges became rare. Their silvery markings glowed only in deep sleep or when they were exceptionally happy. It was with Kael that the true mystery unfolded. He made time each evening, after pack duties, to sit with her and the pups before the fire. It began as a practical exercise. He would gently provoke a flicker of magic from one of them, a floating ember, a swirling dust mote, and Elara would practice calming it. But it quickly became more. Their hands would often touch as they both reached to soothe a pup. And each time, that same warm, amber resonance would flare between them. A tangible energy that felt like sunlight on the skin. It was a connection that existed separately from the pups. A thread that tied them together. One evening, after a particularly strong pulse from Lycos had made all the candle flames in the room stretch tall and thin, Elara had placed her hands over Kael's where he held his son. The resulting calm was instant, and the warm glow that enveloped their joined hands lingered, peaceful and strong. Kael did not pull away. He turned his hands, slowly, so that they were palm to palm with hers. The pup nestled between them. He looked from their linked hands to her face, his gray eyes searching in the firelight. It is not just them, he said, his voice a low rumble. It is us. Together, we create this peace. Elara could only nod. her breath caught in her throat. The feel of his rough, warrior's palms against her softer skin was doing something entirely unpeaceful inside her. "We need to test its limits," he said, his tone shifting to one of pragmatic curiosity, though his eyes remained dark and intent. Outside the lodge, away from stone and fire, in the place where the moon touches the earth. That was how, 2 nights later, under a full, gleaming moon, Ilara found herself in the Howling Glade, a sacred clearing deep in the heart of Blackwood territory. Kyle walked beside her, a pup tucked under each arm. They were alone. He had commanded the perimeter guards to stay at a distance. The glade was breathtaking. Silver moonlight drenched the open circle of grass, and the standing stones that ringed it seemed to hum with a low, sub-aural frequency. This was a place of pack rituals, of communion with the moon. "Here," Kale said, setting the pups down. They immediately began to sniff and explore, their white fur luminous. "The energy is stronger here on a full moon. So is theirs. And so, perhaps, is ours." As if on cue, Lycos, excited by the open space and the thrumming power of the place, let out a happy yip. A circle of mushrooms at the edge of the glade suddenly fluoresced with a bright, blue-white light. Luna, responding to her brother, patted the ground, and a tiny geyser of sparkling, moonlit mist erupted from the soil. Kale watched, not alarmed, but analytical. "It's building. Good." He glanced at Ilara. "Do not intervene yet." The display grew. Leaves on a nearby ash tree began to turn silver from tip to stem. The air crackled with static, raising the hair on Ilara's arms. The pups were not distressed. They were playing, their innate magic dancing with the moon's own energy. But it was growing wild, uncontrolled. "Now," Kale said, his voice tense. Ilara stepped forward into the center of the glade. She didn't shout or grab for them. She simply stood, closed her eyes, and reached for that inner well of quiet she had always possessed. She imagined it not as a small pool, but as a vast, still lake within her, its surface perfectly reflecting the moon above. She let that stillness radiate outward. For a moment, nothing happened. The silver leaves shimmered, the mist gazered. Then Kale was there. He came to stand behind her, not touching her, but so close, she could feel the heat of him along her back. His powerful presence enveloped her, not with dominance, but with a fierce, focused solidarity. "Together," he murmured, his breath stirring her hair. He placed his hands on her shoulders. The moment his skin met the fabric of her dress, the connection ignited. The warm, amber glow erupted not just between their hands, but around their bodies, a shimmering aura that pushed back against the cool silver of the moon and the pup's wild energy. Ilara gasped. It was 1,000 times more intense than before. She felt his strength flowing into her, a river of steady, unwavering power, and she felt her own calm flowing back into him, soothing the constant, vigilant strain of the alpha, tempering his might with peace. It was a perfect, symbiotic loop. In the glade, the wild magic bent. The silver leaching from the leaves reversed, returning to green. The mist settled into a gentle, glowing fog that hugged the ground. Lycos and Luna stopped their chaotic play and sat, watching their father and their guardian, their heads cocked in identical curiosity. The pup's own silvery light softened, harmonizing with the warm amber aura surrounding the 2 adults. Kale's hands tightened on her shoulders. He lowered his head, his lips near her ear. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice thick with awe and something else, something raw and possessive. "This is not just for them. This is fated, Ilara. The moon goddess did not just send you to save my children. She sent you to save me." Ilara turned in the circle of his arms, their aura shimmering around them like a private constellation. In his eyes, she saw the storm not as a threat, but as a power she could now weather. She saw the loneliness that mirrored her own, and the dawning, terrifying hope. He didn't ask. He simply looked at her, his gaze dropping to her lips, a question and an answer in one. And in the heart of the moon-drenched glade, with the ancient stones as witness and their magically calmed children at their feet, Alpha Kale finally closed the last inch of space between them and claimed her lips with his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a conflagration. It was the spark that had been smoldering since the moment he saw her holding his children in her humble hut. It was all the gratitude, the awe, the need, and the undeniable, destined claim exploding into one perfect, consuming fire. The amber glow around them flared, brilliant and warm, outshining the moon itself for one breathtaking second. It was the seal, the bond, the beginning of everything. When they finally broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting together, the glade was utterly, profoundly peaceful. The pups had curled up and fallen asleep. The only light was the moon, and the new, quiet glow that now seemed to permanently reside in the space between their entwined bodies. No words were needed. The howling glade had borne witness to a different kind of ritual, not one of pack, but of soul. The shadow of Silverwood still loomed. The threat was still real, but as they stood together, Kale knew with unshakable certainty that his pack, his children, and his heart had finally found their true, destined Luna. The war for their future would come, but they would face it as one. The world had narrowed to the space between their lips, the warm amber glow, and the thunder of her own heart. When Kael finally pulled back, his breath mingling with hers in the cool night air, Elara felt unmoored, as if the very ground of the howling glade had shifted beneath her feet. His hands remained on her shoulders, steadying her, his thumbs tracing small, unconscious circles on her collarbones. In his winter-gray eyes, the storm had transformed. The ice was gone, replaced by a possessive warmth that stole her breath more surely than the kiss had. He looked at her, as if he were seeing the moon for the first time, a wonder he had long stopped believing in. "Elara," he said, her name a vow on his tongue. She could only stare, her lips still tingling, her body humming with the echo of the connection that had just fused something deep within her soul. The bond was no longer a subtle pull. It was a living cord of light and heat, tying her core to his. A soft whine broke the spell. Luna had toddled over and was now leaning against Elara's leg, her little head tilted. Lycos remained asleep, a small mound of glowing white fur in the dewy grass. Kale's gaze dropped to his daughter, then back to Elara. The alpha practicality reasserted itself, but it was softened now, woven through with a new tenderness. "We should return. The night is deep, and their energy is spent." He released her shoulders, but the loss of his touch felt immediate and acute. He bent, gathering Lycos effortlessly into one arm, then took Luna into the other. The walk back through the moonlit forest was conducted in a silence thicker than any that had come before. It was not awkward, but heavy with revelation. Every brush of his arm against hers as they navigated the narrow path sent a fresh jolt through her system. She could feel his eyes on her profile, a tangible weight. When they reached the lodge, he did not immediately part for his den. He stood in the main room, the sleeping pups in his arms, watching as she stirred the embers of the fire and added a new log. "It changes nothing of the threat," he said finally, his voice low. "Silverwood still lurks. Vorlon still desires what is mine." He said the word with a new, ferocious finality, "but it changes everything for how we face it." Elara turned to face him. "What does it change, Alpha?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "In private, you may call me Kale." The concession was immense. He stepped closer. "It changes that you are no longer just their guardian. What happened in the glade, that was a claiming. Not by bite, not by ceremony, but by the moon goddess herself. The pack will sense it. I sense it. You are mine." The words should have felt domineering. Instead, they felt like a shelter, a declaration of sanctuary. She belonged, utterly and completely, for the first time in her life. "I don't know what that means," she whispered, honesty compelling her. "It means," he said, transferring both pups to one arm so he could reach out and cradle her cheek with his free hand, "that you are my fated mate, my Luna, the other half of my soul, and the balance to my power. It means I will kill for you, die for you, and build a new world with you." His thumb stroked her cheekbone. "It also means Vorlon's interest in my heirs now includes an interest in you. You are precious beyond measure, Elara. And that makes you vulnerable." The stark truth of it settled over the warmth of his claim. She was a target now, not just an incidental bystander. "What do we do?" she asked, leaning into his touch. "We proceed with caution, but without fear. First, the pack must know. Officially, a formal acknowledgement at the next full pack gathering." He dropped his hand. A strategist once more. Though his eyes remained on her. "There will be dissent. Some will say it is too swift. That an Omega cannot be Luna. They are wrong. But we must be prepared." "I am prepared," she said, and found that she meant it. The quiet Omega who foraged alone was gone, forged in the fires of saving the white wolves, and sealed under the full moon. He nodded, respect glowing in his eyes. Tomorrow we begin. You will sit at my side during the day's petitions. You will learn the workings of the pack, not from the shadows, but from the Alpha's seat. He finally moved toward the door to his den, pausing with his hand on the latch. Sleep, Elara, my Luna. Dream of peace. I will guard your rest. He disappeared into his room, leaving her standing by the fire. The title echoed in the silent lodge. My Luna. It was a crown, a bond, and a shield, all at once. Sleep did not come easily. Her mind replayed the kiss, the surge of power, the devastating tenderness in his eyes. But intertwined with the wonder was a thread of cold dread, the scent of cold stone and silver ore. Alpha Vorlons, congratulations. She was no longer just protecting Pups. She was stepping onto a battlefield she barely understood. The next morning arrived with a sharp rap on the main lodge door. It was Beta Torvin, his expression grim. Alpha, a rider from Silverwood, arrived at dawn. He bypassed the sentries on a little-used trail. He waits at the gate. Kale, already dressed and radiating a calm, focused energy that was new, glanced at Elara, who stood near the hearth with a pup on each hip. Alone? Yes. He carries no weapon and flies a banner of parley. Bring him to the council chamber. I will meet him there. Kale's gaze settled on Elara. You will attend. Bring the children. Torvin's eyes widened slightly, but he bowed his head. Yes, Alpha. The man waiting in the council chamber was not what Elara expected. He was young, with sharp, intelligent features, and eyes the color of flint. He wore fine gray wool, not armor, and he bowed with precise respect as Kale entered, Elara at his side. Alpha Kale. I am Jarek, emissary of Alpha Vorlon of Silverwood. I bring renewed congratulations on the health of your remarkable heirs. His eyes flickered to the white pups, lingering for a fraction too long. Then to Elara, registering her proximity with clinical interest. My Alpha is concerned that his previous message may have been misunderstood. He wishes only friendship. To that end, he proposes a gift, the services of our finest master of lore, to help you understand and nurture the unique talents of your young ones. Our archives speak of such celestial blessings. The offer was slick, generous, and utterly insidious. An outsider, a Silverwood scholar, inserted into the heart of Blackwood, into the very den, with the pups, and with her. Kale didn't sit, he loomed, his presence filling the room. My pack has its own lore keepers, my heirs are thriving. We require no outside assistance. Jarek's smile was thin. Of course, but the phenomenon is so rare. What if their power becomes unstable? A danger to themselves, or others? He let the implication hang. My Alpha only wishes to help ensure such a treasure is not lost through lack of understanding. He would be heartbroken if tragedy struck again. The reference to tragedy to Kale's first Luna was a masterstroke of cruelty, a needle aimed precisely at a wound everyone knew existed. Elara felt Kale's power spike, a hot, violent wave of anger he quickly banked. She instinctively shifted Luna in her arms and took a half step closer to him, her shoulder almost touching his arm. A subtle calm radiated from her, the same stillness she used on the pups. She felt Kale's tension ease a fraction, his focus sharpening from blind rage to cold calculation. Your Alpha's concern is noted, Kale said, his voice dangerously pleasant. You may tell him that my heirs have a new guardian, one whose touch brings them unparalleled peace and stability. The danger of tragedy has passed. He placed his hand on the small of Elara's back, a deliberate, claiming gesture. My fated Luna has seen to that. Jarek's flinty eyes snapped to Elara, true surprise breaking through his diplomatic mask. He looked from her humble dress to Kale's possessive hand, to the way the pups nuzzled against her. The pieces clicked together in his mind, forming a picture Vorlon had not anticipated, not just a guardian, but a mate, a solidified, unbreakable front. The emissary recovered quickly, but the damage was done. The strategic landscape had shifted. I see. My congratulations extend to you as well, Alpha. This is joyous news. I shall carry it back to Silverwood. Do, Kale said, dismissal clear in his tone. And convey this. Blackwood is at peace. We seek no alignment, only the security of our own. Any further gifts or unannounced riders will be considered a breach of territory, and answered with appropriate force. Jarek bowed again, deeper this time, and retreated, the silence left in his wake thick and potent. When the door closed, Kale let out a long, controlled breath. His hand remained on Alara's back, warm and heavy. He came to see for himself, to probe for weakness. He found none. Alara looked up at him, the reality of their new union settling upon her. "He found you! He found me! He knows we are together now." "Yes," Kale said, turning to face her fully. The intensity in his eyes was blazing. "Let him know. Let everyone know. The game has changed. You are not a weakness, Alara. You are my greatest strength. And tomorrow, when the pack gathers, the whole world will understand that the Alpha of Blackwood has found his Luna, and his fortress has a heart once more." The challenge had been issued, not with a roar, but with a claim. The battle lines were drawn, not just around the white wolves, but around the woman who held them. And as Kale looked at his mate, he knew the real war for their future had just begun. The news, as Kale predicted, spread through Blackwood like wildfire, fanned by a gale. The Alpha has claimed his fated mate. The Omega is to be Luna. The pack gathered that evening in the Great Clearing, not by formal summons but by sheer, buzzing gravity. Torches smoked, painting shifting masks of light and shadow on hundreds of wary, curious faces. Alara stood in the lodge, looking at the simple gray gown she had laid out. It was her best, but it was still the dress of an forager, of the unseen. A soft knock preceded Kale's entry. He carried a long bundle of deep blue fabric. Without a word, he unfurled it. It was a gown of midnight blue wool, so dark it was nearly black, but threaded through with silver that caught the light like a starry sky. The cut was simple but regal, meant for a woman who stood beside power, not behind it. "For my Luna," he said, his voice rough. It was hers. It has been kept in cedar. He didn't need to say whose it was. His first Luna's. The gesture was one of profound trust and inclusion, a passing of a mantle. Alara touched the fabric, her throat tight. "It's beautiful. She would have liked you," he said, a startling moment of raw honesty. She valued kindness above all else. He helped her into it, his fingers surprisingly deft with the clasps. The gown fit as if made for her, the silver threads shimmering against the dark like the markings on the pups. When he turned her to face him, his eyes darkened with a possessive awe. "You are a vision." He himself wore his formal Alpha's cloak, the pelt of a legendary black wolf clasped at his shoulder with a moonstone. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Ready?" She wasn't, but she nodded. Lycos and Luna, sensing the import, followed at their heels, their usual glow subdued into a gentle, steady radiance. When they stepped out of the lodge and onto the path to the clearing, a hush fell, rolling outward like a wave. The pack parted before them. Alara felt the weight of their gazes, the disbelief, the calculation, the dawning respect from some, the simmering resentment from others. She kept her head high, her hands secure in Kale's, her focus on the warmth of his touch, and the soft padding of the pups behind her. They mounted the speaking platform. Kale did not release her hand. He stood, a mountain of authority, and let his power roll out, not in aggression, but in a clear, dominant declaration of his will. "Blackwood," his voice boomed. "You have heard the truth. The moon goddess, in her wisdom, sent a savior into the woods for my children. She did more than save their lives. She calmed their spirits, sheathed their wild power. And in doing so, she called to the soul of your Alpha." He looked at Alara. And his voice, while still carrying to the back of the crowd, softened around the edges. "Alara is my fated mate, my true Luna. By her side, I am not just a protector, but a builder. With her grace, our pack's future is secured. Do you challenge the will of the moon?" The silence was profound. It was the elder, Igraine, who stepped forward first. Her eyes, sharp as flint, scanned Alara, then dropped to the white pups who sat obediently at Alara's feet, their presence the most eloquent argument. Igraine placed a fist over her heart and bowed. "The moon goddess's will is clear. Welcome, Luna Alara." One by one, others followed, warriors, mothers, craftsmen. The bow was not just to Kale, but to her. A swell of emotion, terrifying and beautiful, clogged Alara's throat. This was acceptance, this was a home, but not all bowed. A cluster of warriors near the back, led by a hulking man named Rolf, a contender for beta before Torvin, stood stiffly. Their scents were sour with discontent. Kale's eyes found them, a silent warning in his gaze. The moment stretched. Tense. Then, with obvious reluctance, Rolf gave a curt, shallow nod, his followers mimicking him. The descent was not gone, but it was forced underground for now. The gathering turned to celebration. Mead flowed. A roasted boar was brought forth. Kael kept Alara at his side, introducing her formally, his hand a constant anchor at the small of her back. She spoke little, but she listened, she smiled, and her calm presence began to work its subtle magic on the pack's nervous energy. Later, as the moon rose high, Kael led her to a quieter spot at the edge of the clearing. The sounds of the feast were a warm murmur behind them. He turned her to face him, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You see, they are yours, as I am yours." Before she could answer, a terrified shriek ripped through the night's merriment. From the direction of the Omega quarters, a plume of thick, acrid smoke billowed into the sky, tinged with an unnatural greenish glow. Cries of alarm erupted. Kael's head snapped up, his body tensing. "Torvin!" he roared, but Alara was already moving, her heart a frozen lump in her chest. The herbalist's hut, she'd been there just that afternoon. Old Maeve, the kindly healer, who had shown her kindness when no one else did, lived there, surrounded by drying herbs and tinctures. She gathered her skirts and ran, Kael's shout to wait swallowed by the chaos. She pushed through panicked pack members, the scent of burning wolfsbane and mistletoe herbs that were harmless when prepared correctly, but toxic when burned raw, stinging her nose. The hut was an inferno of magical green flame, and through the blinding heat, she saw a figure slumped in the doorway. Old Maeve. "No!" Alara gasped. Without thinking, she grabbed a discarded cloak from the ground, dunked it in a water trough, and threw it over her head. She felt Kael reaching for her, his command a physical pull, but she broke free, driven by a debt of kindness. The heat was a physical wall. The green flames seemed to suck the air from her lungs. She stumbled to Maeve, grabbing the old woman under the arms. The thatch above groaned, threatening to collapse. Then Kael was there. He didn't try to pull her back. He moved with her, his larger body shielding hers as he hauled Maeve's limp form up with one arm and wrapped the other around Alara, dragging them both back just as the roof caved in with a shower of sparks. They collapsed on the cool grass, coughing. Warriors rushed forward with buckets. Alara knelt by Maeve, her hands flying to the healer's throat. Finding a pulse, weak but steady, the old woman's eyes fluttered open, filled with pain and confusion. "Who did this, Maeve?" Kael demanded, his voice a guttural growl as he surveyed the sabotage. Maeve's whisper was a ragged thread. "Didn't see. A face. Scent of cold stone. And silver. The same scent from the woods." Kael's head whipped around, his eyes scanning the chaotic crowd. The Silverwood emissary was long gone. But he had not acted alone. This was not an attack from outside. This was an inside strike. A message. "Your peace is an illusion. Your pack is not secure. We can reach you anywhere." His gaze found Rolf and his dissenters, who were helping with the buckets, their faces carefully blank. The firelight danced in Kael's eyes, but the warmth from the gathering was utterly extinguished, replaced by a glacial, murderous rage. He looked at Alara, covered in soot, her beautiful gown ruined, her hands tender from the heat, yet still tenderly cradling Maeve's head. The attack was not on the pups, it was on her world, on the gentle, healing part of the pack she represented. It was a declaration of war, aimed at the heart of his new Luna. He rose to his full height, pulling Alara up with him, keeping her close. His voice, when it came, did not boom. It cut through the night like a blade, cold and deadly and promising vengeance. "The games are over," Alpha Kael announced to his terrified pack. This was no accident. This was an act of cowardice and war. From this moment, Blackwood is on a war footing. He looked down at Alara, his expression ferocious with protectiveness. "And they have just made their worst mistake. They tried to burn what is mine. Now, they will learn what it means to face my storm." The celebration was ashes. The future was fire and shadow. And in the smoke-choked night, the Alpha and his Luna stood united, the bond between them hardening from romance into unbreakable steel. The days that followed were etched in grim purpose. The charred remains of the herbalist's hut stood as a blackened scar in the village, a constant reminder of the vulnerability Silverwood had exposed. Old Maeve recovered, thanks to Alara's diligent care and the remnants of her own herb stores, but the fear lingered like smoke in the pack's mind. Kyle's response was swift and brutal. Patrols tripled, sentries were paired, each watching the other for signs of disloyalty or strange influence. The dissenters around Rolf were assigned to the most dangerous, remote border watches, effectively isolating them. The pack's energy turned inward, sharpening into a focused blade. Through it all, Elara found her place not as a delicate figurehead, but as the heart Kale had named her. She moved among the pack, visiting the families of sentries, helping to redistribute healing duties since Maeve's hut was gone, her quiet calm a balm to the rising anxiety. She did not hide in the lodge, she was seen. Always with Kale or his most trusted warriors, but seen nonetheless a Luna who served, not just one who presided. Her true work, however, remained with the Pups and with Kale. In the secure confines of his private den, they explored their bond with a new urgency. It was no longer about wonder. It was about forging a weapon. Again, Kale would say, his voice a low command in the dim light. He would summon his alpha power, letting it fill the room, a crushing, dominant force that would make any normal wolf whimper and bare its throat. Elara, at first, had struggled under the weight of it. But then she would find her center, that deep forest pool, and extend her own energy. Not to fight his, but to weave with it. Where his power was a raging blizzard, hers was the enduring, silent bedrock beneath the snow. Together, they created something new, an aura of absolute, unshakable authority that was both formidable and strangely peaceful. It commanded obedience not through fear, but through an overwhelming sense of rightness. Lycos and Luna were their barometers. When their energies clashed, the Pups would whine, and their silver light would spike erratically. When they harmonized, the Pups would play contentedly, their markings emitting a steady, harmonious glow that seemed to sync with the rhythm of their parents' linked powers. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Elara sat on a fur by the fire, exhausted. Kale brought her a cup of mulled wine and sat beside her. His bulk a comforting presence. "You are mastering it," he said, not as praise, but as fact. "It tires me," she admitted, a rare moment of vulnerability she only showed him. "It strengthens you," he corrected gently, "and it strengthens us. What we create together. Vorlon has no concept of it. His power is all brute force and glittering threat. Ours is rooted. It is of the earth and the moon. It cannot be toppled." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw where a smudge of soil from the new healing garden she'd started still lingered. "The fire was meant to frighten you, to make you retreat, to make me lock you away. It has done the opposite." She leaned into his touch. "I am not fearless, Kale. I was terrified that night. But you ran toward the fire," he said, his eyes gleaming with fierce pride. "You did not let the fear rule you. That is the heart of a true Luna." His thumb brushed her lower lip. The formal claiming. "We have waited. The pack is tense. The threat is real. But I find I have no more patience for waiting." Her breath hitched. The claiming bite. The final, irrevocable seal of the fated mate bond. It was more than a mark. It was a merging of souls, a permanent tether. "Here," she whispered. "Now, with all that is happening?" "Because of all that is happening," he said, his voice dropping to a raw, intimate rasp. "Let our bond be at its strongest before the storm breaks. Let me carry your strength in my very blood when I face our enemies." The logic was sound, but the look in his eyes was pure, unadulterated need. It mirrored the ache in her own soul. She nodded, a simple, trusting movement. He needed no further invitation. With a tenderness that belied his fierce expression, he gathered her into his arms and carried her to the large bed in his den, a place that had known only grief and loneliness for years. He laid her down as if she were made of moonlight, following her down, his body caging hers in the most protective way. There were no more words. His kisses were a slow, thorough claiming in themselves, mapping her face, her throat, her shoulders. His hands, so capable of violence, were reverent as they removed the simple gown she wore, as they learned the landscape of her body. Elara, under his worshipful attention, shed the last of her Omega shyness. She touched him freely, tracing the scars that told his history, learning the powerful muscles that guarded his heart. When the moment came, it was not a sudden bite in the heat of passion. It was a deliberate, sacred act. He held her gaze, his eyes pools of stormy gray devotion. "You are my heart, my soul, my eternal Luna," he vowed, the words resonating in the quiet room. Then he lowered his head. The feel of his teeth at the junction of her neck and shoulder was sharp, a piercing bliss that quickly dissolved into a wave of pure, golden energy. It was not pain, but a glorious, shocking completion. She felt the bond, that shimmering cord between them, solidify, amplify, and then weave itself into the very fabric of their beings. She saw his memories, not all, but flashes. The joy of his first Luna, the devastating grief of her loss, the overwhelming love for his children, the instant he knew she was his fate. And she felt her own essence flow into him, her quiet years of loneliness, her wonder at the white pups, her awe of him, her steadfast, deepening love. When he finally pulled away, licking the wound to seal it, the mark glowed with a soft, amber-silver light before settling into the skin, a permanent, beautiful testament. Elara felt power, his power, alpha power, singing in her veins alongside her own. She felt his emotions as a steady hum in the background of her mind. She was Elara, but she was also, inextricably, part of Kale. He looked down at her, his own eyes wide with the shared experience. A single tear traced a path through the dusting of stubble on his cheek. "Mine," he breathed, the words saturated with a possession that was now absolute, mutual, and eternal. "Yours," she confirmed, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of blood, wine, and destiny. They were one. The fortress of Blackwood now had an impenetrable heart, and as they lay entwined in the aftermath, the warm glow of their bond enveloping the room, a new sense of certainty filled them both. Let Silverwood come. Let Vorlon send his spies and his fire. They were no longer just Alpha and Luna. They were a single, unbreakable force. The storm was coming, but they were the eye within it, and they were ready. The change was immediate and profound. With the claiming bite, the pack's perception of Elara shifted on a primal level. She was no longer just the Alpha's chosen mate. She carried his mark, his scent, and a whisper of his formidable power in her own quiet aura. The last remnants of doubt, even among Rolf's faction, were silenced. To challenge her now was to challenge the Alpha's very soul, and none were that foolish. A moon cycle passed in a tense, watchful peace. Silverwood made no further overt moves, but the pressure at the border was a constant, simmering presence. Kale's scouts reported Vorlon amassing warriors for a grand hunt near the shared mountain pass. The pretext was flimsy, the threat was clear. In that moon's time, Lycos and Luna grew. They were no longer pups, but sturdy young wolves, their magic maturing from playful sparks into a focused, formidable force. Under Elara's calming guidance and Kale's disciplined training, they learned to control it. Lycos could now summon a shield of shimmering light, while Luna could weave illusions of mist and shadow. Together, they were a breathtaking combination of defense and misdirection. The final piece clicked into place on a crisp, autumn morning. Elara was in the new healing garden with Maeve, discussing the winter stock of herbs, when a wave of dizziness hit her, followed by a surge of unfamiliar scent, her own, but layered with something sweet and new, and unmistakably tied to Kale's. Her hand flew to her stomach. Maeve, with a healer's keen eye and a wise, knowing smile, simply nodded. "The pack's future grows strong, Luna," the old woman said, her eyes gleaming. That evening, when Kyle returned from the border, his senses alert to the slightest change, he froze in the doorway of their den. His eyes swept over Elara, who sat by the fire with Lycos's head in her lap. He inhaled deeply, and his entire body went still. The storm in his eyes stilled, replaced by a awe so profound it made Elara's heart ache. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees before her. He didn't speak. He simply laid his head in her lap, next to Lycos, his arms wrapping around her waist. He trembled. "You know," she whispered, her fingers sinking into his dark hair. A ragged breath shuddered out of him. He looked up, his eyes glistening. "A pup. Our pup." The words were filled with a reverence, usually reserved for the moon herself. In that moment, he was not the fearsome Alpha, but a man humbled by a miracle he thought his heart was too scarred to ever receive again. The news, when shared with the pack elders, sent a surge of raw, hopeful joy through Blackwood. An heir born of the fated bond, a sibling to the miraculous white wolves. It was the final sign of the goddess's blessing, a promise of a strong future. The pack's spirit, once anxious, hardened into a united, ferocious determination. What they protected now was not just a pair of special pups or a new Luna, but a legacy. Vorlon of Silverwood, it seemed, sensed this shift. His patience snapped. The attack came not with stealth, but with a declaration of war. His forces, clad in polished silver mail that gleamed coldly under the moon, crossed the border at dawn, cutting through a remote guard post. They marched not for the village, but straight for the howling glade, the spiritual heart of Blackwood, and the place of Kael and Alara's bonding. Kael received the news with a terrifying calm. He stood on the lodge steps, Alara beside him, the pack warriors assembled below, a sea of grim faces and bared teeth. Lycos and Luna stood at their parents' side, no longer puppies, but young wolves with eyes of storm and moonlight, their fur gleaming with latent power. "He seeks to desecrate our sacred place," Kael's voice rang out, clear and cold. "He seeks to break what we have built. He does not understand. We are not just a pack. We are a family, and we do not break." He turned to Alara, and in front of his entire pack, he kissed her, deep and claiming. Then he pressed his forehead to hers. "Stay at the lodge. Guard our future." He meant their unborn child. Alara shook her head, a fierce light in her own eyes. "My place is with my mate. My power is with yours. Our children fight with us." She looked at Lycos and Luna, who let out low, confident growls. The bond between them all thrummed, a chord of four-part harmony. Kael saw the truth in her eyes, felt it in the bond. To separate now would weaken them all. He nodded, a sharp jerk of his chin. "Then we face the dawn together." The Blackwood pack moved like a shadow through the forest, silent and deadly. They reached the edge of the howling glade as the first rays of sun speared through the trees, illuminating Vorlon's silver-clad warriors standing in the center of the circle, a blasphemous stain on the hallowed ground. Vorlon himself was a tall, handsome man with gold-streaked hair and eyes like a snake. He smiled as Kael emerged from the tree line. "Kael, you brought the family. How touching. Hand over the white wolves, and perhaps I'll let your new mate live." Kael didn't bother with words. He let out a roar that was pure, undiluted alpha command, amplified by his bond with Alara. It wasn't just sound, it was a wave of force that made the Silverwood front line stumble. The battle erupted. It was chaos, but at its center was a pocket of terrible, beautiful order. Kael fought like a god of war, his movements enhanced by Alara's calm focus flowing through their bond. He anticipated blows, his strength seemingly limitless. Alara did not fight with claws, but with her will. When a Silverwood warrior broke through to her, she merely looked at him. And a wave of paralyzing peace, a wanting to lay down arms, washed over him, leaving him vulnerable to a Blackwood defender. But the true spectacle were the children. Lycos, beside his father, summoned shields of hard light that deflected arrows and sword strikes. Luna, weaving through the legs of warriors, cast illusions making 3 Blackwood wolves look like 30, making the very mist of the glade rise up to confuse and disorient. Vorlon, enraged, shifted into a massive, silver-gray wolf, and charged directly at Kael. They met in a clash of fur and fang, a whirlwind of primal fury. Vorlon was larger, his technique honed by arrogance. He gained the upper hand, his jaws snapping for Kael's throat. Alara, from across the glade, felt the jolt of danger through the bond. She didn't scream. She dropped to her knees, placed her hands on the earth of the howling glade, and poured every ounce of her love, her calm, and her fierce protective energy into the bond and through it, into Kael. A golden amber light erupted from Kael's fur. Vorlon yelped, blinded and scorched by the pure, bonded power. In that second, Kael struck, his teeth finding their mark, but he did not kill. He held the Silverwood alpha pinned, utterly subdued, the fight gone from him. Around them, the battle stuttered and died as Silverwood warriors saw their alpha defeated. Kael shifted back, standing over Vorlon's human form, his chest heaving. "Your pack is defeated, your ambition ash," Kael snarled. "But I am not a murderer of defeated alphas at a sacred site. Leave. Now. And know this. If Silverwood ever looks toward Blackwood again, we will not defend. We will end you. And your line." The message was clear. The mercy was a demonstration of supreme confidence, of a strength that needed no slaughter to prove itself. As the broken Silverwood forces retreated, the rising sun fully illuminated the howling glade. The Blackwood pack, wounded but victorious, gathered around their alpha family. Kyle pulled Alara to his side, Lycos and Luna pressing close, their white fur streaked with dirt but glowing with triumph. Kale looked at his mate, at their amazing children, at the pack that had fought as one. He raised his voice. Not in a roar, but in a clear, proud declaration that echoed off the ancient stones. Behold the strength of Blackwood. It does not lie in one alpha's might, but in the bond of mates, in the love of a family, and in the heart of a pack united. This is our dawn. A single, unified howl rose from every Blackwood throat, a song of victory, of family, of a future forged in fire and sealed in moonlight. And as the sound filled the forest, Alara leaned into Kale, his arm tight around her, their shared pulse beating a steady, peaceful rhythm against the mark on her neck. The storm had passed. The white wolves were safe. The fated mates were won. And under the new sun, a legendary love story, born from kindness in a dark wood, had cemented its place as the beating, unbreakable heart of the pack forevermore.